Hello, welcome to Let's GTFO with Bethany and Jana. I'm Bethany.
And I'm Jana. Hey, y'all. Do us a favor and hit the subscribe button.
And today we have one of my favorite people on. I'm very excited. Her name is Elyzabeth Gorman, and she is the founder of Badass Tours. And so we're going to be talking about her tour company, but also badasses in history and badass immigrants who have made a difference in the countries where they're from. We really like her tours. She's an incredible storyteller. Actually, as you'll hear, she is the storyteller-in-chief at Badass Tours. But Jana, thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to say that we met her at an event that we did at the American Book Center in Amsterdam that we co-sponsored along with the John Adams Society. Did I say the name right? The John Adams
John Adams Institute.
John Adams Institute. And when I found out who she was, I was very excited because I was fangirling because I had already listened to some podcasts where she was speaking, and I was already on my long list of things to do to look her up because she was so cool. And so we met her, and she was indeed very cool. And then she told us about a tour that she was about to do. It was part of the May 5th celebrations for it's Bevrijdingsdag, which means Liberation Day. And she partnered with the Dutch government to do these tours around resistance during World War II.
Yeah.
And I
Side
think
note:
American
in the Netherlands, they don't celebrate Star Wars Day on May. Actually, on May the 4th, they celebrate Remembrance Day, and then May 5th is Liberation Day. Here as to remember World War II and all of the things that happened here. Which is that was also one of the things that when I moved here was a little bit. It was a cultural difference, I would say, is that because World War II was here, like people remember. It's like my grandmother ate tulip bulbs and survived the winter that way, kind of a thing.
I don't know if I've ever told you this. I'm getting a little bit off topic, but it's really shows you how real this was. One time, my late mother-in-law, she passed away, I think about 10 years ago now, almost. She was here for dinner. We were sitting up on the roof terrace having this lovely dinner. And then I started peppering her with questions. I mean, once a journalist, always a journalist, right? And I was peppering her with questions about what it was like under the Nazis. And I brought the mood down. Like it was like she was so somber. And
Nazis are a real bummer.
yeah, it was really different. And I realized, oh, I guess you were not supposed to ask those questions because the war was so hard on so many people, and it's very much still relevant in society today. They did almost starve to death after the war, in the tulip winter. I think this is what they call it, the tulip winter, where there was no food. And she also told me stories about girls who dated Nazis. And as soon as the Canadians freed the country, those girls were brought up and paraded through town and abused and had all their hair cut off. And they were really punished, really for survival, I guess, because people were starving, and it's very easy for us to judge people's behavior from the safety and comfort of today's world.
Of course. Yeah. Well, and actually the here in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, if you haven't been, there's the Dutch Resistance Museum, and it's really an incredible museum, really pretty interactive, and it tells all kinds of different stories of different people during World War II, how they survived, sort of the different moral quandaries that they faced, what they did. And I
Card also.
It is,
Okay.
yes. In here you can get, in the Netherlands, they have the museum cart is you pay like 60 or $70 a year, and you can go to over 400 museums in the Netherlands for free for our listeners. So, but anyway, great deal and great option here in the Netherlands. But and yeah, the Verset Museum is really awesome.
And I do want to go, but we did do this tour with her that the Dutch government partnered with Badass Tours to do, and she took us on a walking tour through. It's like the zoo area, the artsis. What is that area of Amsterdam
Uh,
called? Where we started at the
that's kind of what I call it.
Waterloo.
Plantage, yeah.
Yeah, Plantagebuurt. That's exactly
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it's called, Plantagebuurt.
Yeah.
And she gave us such a beautiful history not really just of resistance in the Netherlands, but she also involved a lot of the, or some of the members of colonial, those who fought colonialism as well, who were immigrants, of course. And it was just such a beautiful storytelling episode. Of course, when we do our walking tours in Amsterdam with our group on our group tour for GTFO Tours, we also have Elizabeth as our tour guide for the center of Amsterdam, and she tells a lot of the same stories, but it's a little broader than just resistance. But we wanted to focus today a bit more on resistance and also immigration, and because immigration is very related, of course. Usually, the fascists don't like immigrants much either, as we
They do
see with
not.
what's happening in the U.S. They do not. And they're in extra danger, but also they can be really important members of the resistance.
Absolutely. Well, and you and I talk about this a lot. I think Jason Stanley was a professor at Yale, and they had this big article in the New York Times about, we study fascism and we're leaving. And they talked about the importance of creating centers of resistance in places of relative safety. And my big thing is, I think that at this point, given where the United States is, given that the institutions in the United States are failing to protect people from being disappeared, from being detained without
Yeah.
cause, from being, frankly, I mean, in some cases tortured, right? Like these are concentration camps. And it's really horrific. And when you are at this point, I think generally speaking, you need international intervention is in like genocide theory, right? You need international intervention at the point where the United States is. And so I think that's just a big piece that's missing from a lot of the organizing thinking that's happening is how can we organize support internationally, and what does that look like? Are we pressuring foreign leaders? Because frankly, they're some of the only people that Trump has been reacting to, right? Not some of the, but some of the big people, right? All right. Well, we are excited to be here with Elyzabeth Gorman. She is the founder and also storyteller-in-chief of Badass Tours, which is a fantastic walking tour company here in Amsterdam. And so let's kick it off. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what made you decide to move to the Netherlands on the DAFT visa?
Sure. So I studied theater. I always knew I wanted to do theater. And part of that was studying both directing and dramaturgy, which is a dramaturg works with either a playwright or a director or production to kind of give historical context. So I did learn a bit of research in my studies, and I learned a lot about storytelling in terms of theatrical story structure. So I went to New York. I met my honey there. Um, and it's actually kind of embarrassing, but he was the one that fell in love with Amsterdam. We were here on vacation, and he just said, "This is a city I have to live in." And at the time, I was like, well, I need to do theater in New York. And I'm really lucky that he chose to hang around. um, and I think, as happens to a lot of people, I burned out pretty hard on New York and theater. And he did actually give me time to process it, but in my memory, like the day after my last show, he had a Gantt chart and a budget and a timeline and a plan for how we would move here.
Cool. And then you moved here. And so how did Badass Tours come about?
Well, when we moved here, we thought it was going to be to do events. Like I said, we both have a lot of producing experience. Some of the other, I just did a lot of theater stuff. So I did a lot of stage management, both for events, like massive fundraisers, and for productions themselves. And so we thought that's what we'd be doing. And when we got here, there was a little hiccup, which I assume someone working with you wouldn't have, but we had a little hiccup where the KVK, oh gosh, it was either the KVK or immigration. This was a while ago. Someone needed to okay that I could work for SE Productions, which was our company. And so while that was going on, I just learned everything I could about Amsterdam. And I found all of these amazing, initially women's stories that I would have written about back in New York, because the kind of the second half of my career as a theater maker was all about using history stories to kind of illuminate where we are now. Like I did this big project where I took the women of the English Civil War from this series, these 4 Shakespeare plays, to kind of examine how we feel about women in power, which I did in like 2015. So it was a really relevant conversation. And off the back of that, and I did another one about women in Asian history and kind of reflecting on the roles Asian American women kind of get shunted into. And off the back of that, I started writing a lot about women in history. And this is before Google Translate. This is before you could point your camera at something and have a rough translation pop up on your phone.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there at the main central library with like this stack of books and a dictionary. And just like in like the US, the libraries are like teenagers and pensioners, like older people who've retired. And they're kind of like sitting around me, like the teenagers are playing footsie, the old people are kind of like, angrily going through a book or a newspaper. And here I am going back and forth between the book I'm reading and the dictionary, trying to be sure I understand what I'm reading. And I was like, these are amazing stories. I would have written about this in New York, so now I have to make it easier for other people to find these stories. So that's kind of that was the impetus, and then it's all kind of gotten away from me a little bit.
So your title, Storyteller-in-Chief, which I love that title, and I can confirm that you're an excellent storyteller. I love
Thank
your
you.
walking tours. I find them profound, um, consciousness raising, and even life changing, I would say.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I love that. I
Yeah,
love your
definitely.
tours. Um, and so talk to me about how you view your role and how would you want to be remembered by a
Mm.
historian in the future who comes and looks you up in that library, which is now in our pocket, of course. How do you want to be remembered? What will your contribution be?
Well, actually one of my favorite stories is this woman named Cindy Kerseborn, who in her 50s decided that she wanted to make the literature of her youth, because she's from Suriname. She wanted to make Dutch Caribbean literature better known, so she did these documentaries. And one of the results of these documentaries is that Astrid Romer, um, who was a feminist writer kind of before her time, in case someone sees this, she's controversial in the Surinamese community. But Astrid Romer wrote this book in 1984 called On the Madness of Women, and it got longlisted for the Booker Prize, 2019. So like 30 years after she wrote it, more than 30 years after she wrote it, in large part because of Cindy's work. So I hope if someone, first of all, I hope I'm there to look up. That would be pretty cool. And I hope if someone found me, I would be part of a long line of Amsterdammers who are boosting other people's voices.
Okay, so one of the big questions that we grapple with as American immigrants is how we can help the fight at home.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about, Jason Stanley, who was a former Yale professor and studies fascism, talks about building centers of resistance in places of relative safety. Can you think of examples of immigrants who have done something like that?
Yeah, there's quite a few, kind of in both directions, actually. There are Amsterdammers who, during World War II, escaped the Nazi invasion and then, would funnel information, weapons. In fact, the royal family did that. The Queen and the royal family escaped. Some Amsterdammers are actually still really angry that they did that. But if you look at, like, for example, the uh, Denmark's royalty, if you look at the royalty that stayed in occupied Europe, they were basically turned into puppets. Whereas what Wilhelmina did is she funneled all this information and weapons to the resistance. She, from a distance kind of helped with organizing, especially towards the end of the war, helped with organizing the resistance. And she would do these pirate radio broadcasts that inspired people. Like the Nazis had taken all the radios, so people would turn their toasters or their iron into a radio so they could hear these broadcasts.
That's so cool. I had no idea.
Yeah,
Wow.
cool.
That's really badass.
Indeed. And I can also think of people. Yeah, there was a woman. So I don't know if she would consider herself an immigrant. There was a woman named Ivi Potterai who she was from Indonesia. I think you guys probably heard me talk about her. So she's from Indonesia. She came here to study because her grandfather, like she was Indonesian, but her grandfather had been declared white. So they were able to come uh, to the Netherlands because the Netherlands had a very strict policy um, on not letting Indonesian, especially Indonesian women, come to the Netherlands. And she fought against the Nazis. She was part of an anti-fascist group. So there was like fewer than 1,000 Indonesians in the country at that point. So they ran huge risks. And she was mostly a courier. So she was running these enormous risks because she would stand out anywhere she was. And then once the war was over, she and her group pivoted to really fighting for Indonesian independence. And the Netherlands was literally fighting a war. They went from being occupied in the Nazis to a military action to hold on to the Netherlands. So she overnight goes from one type of hostile territory to another type of hostile territory. And she really pressured the Netherlands. And I know you guys have heard this story, but I love this story.
Tell us
This big, there was this big anti-fascist gathering, or this big communist gathering. Although I don't know if communist is the right word for this point in history. But there's a big lefty gathering. And they knew that they had to have someone from this Indonesian group speak because of everything they'd done. And they were afraid that one of the men would be a rabble rouser. So Ify was, smaller. She was very soft-spoken. So they're like, let's just let this chick talk. She won't rile anyone up. And she was so electric. She actually got like a hall full of 1,300 people chanting for Indonesian independence. Again, most of these people are not Indonesian. She really, really inspired people. And that was kind of dangerous. And then what I think was really interesting that she did, so that was the first of several events like that she did. And what I think was really interesting is after that event, where she really spoke from an Indonesian perspective, she would go to these events. So the Dutch word is the polderland, and that is the smaller villages, the less urban areas. So she went to other cities, but she also went to maybe the less urban part of the country, the less liberal part of the country. And the speeches she would give would be about these poor Dutch soldiers. Like she read a letter that a soldier was writing home and he was shot mid-letter. And so she would read this like, what a waste of innocent lives. And so she was really an electric speaker and she was really clever. So I think it is definitely possible to raise those kind of issues from afar.
Yeah, I was also thinking of Anton de Kom as well.
Yeah.
And I'm so inspired by him.
Yeah. It's really interesting, right? Like, how do you, and that, I mean, that brings up the bigger question, what's an immigrant, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So for your listeners/viewers, Anton de Kom was born in Suriname. He's a Black man born in Suriname 25 years after the end of slavery. In fact, his father had been enslaved. And both because there was limited education available to young Black men and because he was darker skinned in a society that, just like a lot of racist societies, was really colorist, he came to the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, he did a bunch of activism around labor. He did a bunch of education. He wrote the first Black history in Dutch. But that Black history was written after he'd gone back to Suriname to try and improve the lot of indentured laborers in Suriname. And the Dutch government arrested him and basically exiled him without trial, exiled him from Suriname without trial. But I think there's a real question to be asked there about what is an immigrant, because at the time, Suriname was still a Dutch colony. Suriname didn't get independence until 1975. And in the years surrounding the 10 years, so like 1970 to 1980, there are about 140,000 people who moved from Suriname to the Netherlands. And they're often referred to as immigrants. But again, they were born with Dutch passports. The whole reason they were, well, a factor in them immigrating was that if they didn't see, I said it too. A factor in them moving from Suriname to the Netherlands was that if they weren't here by 1980, they would lose their Dutch passport because they had one. And so I think sometimes when we talk about immigration in Dutch history, it gets a little fuzzy.
Bear with me for a moment of family history, actually. I think I've told you this story, Elizabeth, and I think Bethany, you've heard it as well. But you were talking about how horrible the war in Indonesia was when the Dutch were perpetrating essentially a genocide against Indonesia to keep it as a colony. Edwin's father, who fortunately evaded, he was too young to be taken by the Nazis. But as soon as the war was over, he was sent to Indonesia to fight there. And it was horrible. I mean, absolutely horrible for him as a Dutchman, but of course for the people, it was truly, truly like brutal. And he didn't want to have any part of it because of the moral issue of what the Dutch were doing in Indonesia. He objected to it on a moral ground. So when he got back, his younger brother, who was just then old enough also to go to Indonesia, and who had been during the Nazi occupation, had been sent to Sweden to work on a farm, because a lot of children were sent to Sweden and other countries to escape the Nazis. And he was very lucky because some of those children weren't treated very well. Some of them were treated like laborers, but he was treated like a family member. And as soon as his brother got back, and this was still like everybody was incredibly poor. I mean, the Netherlands had been devastated, right? Like all of Europe. And they rounded up enough money to put him onto a train to send him to Sweden. So he could not to go to war in Indonesia because my husband's father was so concerned about genocide, basically.
Yeah.
So he went to Sweden and he married the farmer's daughter. And had children. I think they had like five. I think they had five children. I think it was a lot. It was a lot of children and a lot of grandchildren. And he lived there until he passed a few years ago, with his Swedish wife. And so my husband, who's been Dutch since like the Netherlands existed, his family's been Dutch, also has a Swedish branch now. And I think that just shows you that like justice and injustice is one of the driving forces of immigration around the world, throughout history. I guess it's a bit of a long story, but I think it's like it just showed you that. I think also the consciousness of Dutch people generally. I don't think he was certainly not alone in that, and also that different countries and people from different countries play different roles at different times, right?
Right. And there's cultural power. There's cultural power as well. So I mentioned Cindy Kirseborn earlier. She is a nurse from Suriname who lived here, and her work as a documentarian brought a cultural spotlight to a few different writers from the Dutch Caribbean. And again, like, I don't know if you would call someone like Nydia Curry an immigrant because she was from the islands that are still part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Right.
But she went back and forth she was one of the people who took Papiaments, which is the native language of Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao. And she kind of brought it into the Netherlands as a high literary art form. And again, that's a form of cultural resistance.
Yeah.
And there were certainly this is a little bit strange because it's talking about people who are still alive. A couple people that jumped to my head, kind of go in reverse order. There's a woman named Tineke Sumpter. I just did a project about her at University of Amsterdam, and she was from here. She's a Dutch woman of Surinamese descent, and she's a lesbian, and she was doing all of this kind of work for Black lesbians and specifically Surinamese lesbians here. And then she went to Suriname. So I guess she was an immigrant to Suriname. And in Suriname, she wasn't necessarily explicitly working on queer causes. She was working more on, this was during the AIDS crisis, so she was working on health structures and improving those structures and improving women's access to support. And then one of the Surinamese politicians said that homosexuality was a disease that needed to be eradicated. And Tineka set up the first Pride in Suriname, which is an incredibly brave thing to do. And then kind of in the reverse order, there's a woman from Suriname named Tvi Choa, and she knew she was gay from the time, well, according to her interviews, she knew she was gay quite young, but she stayed in the closet in Suriname to really work within the government and work for better conditions. And then when she came back here, so she's here for university, went back to Suriname, and then came back here. And when she came back here, she started working on the Society of Suriname, which is what just opened the Surinamese Museum. And she also works in Mil Colores, which is a group that's focused on lesbians of color. So it's interesting within Dutch history because there's a lot of going back and forth, you know?
Yeah, that is really interesting. Very cool. Speaking about gay folks, some of our favorite people who you talk about on the tour are queer folks. And we wanted to have you tell our listeners about them. So obviously we're gonna start with my favorite, Bet Fun Beta. Can you tell folks her story? Because she's amazing. And my favorite way to resist Nazis.
One of my favorite things about, one of my favorite things about talking about queer people here is that Amsterdam did have the world's first gay marriage, and there was nothing in the 18th or 19th century to suggest that that would be the case. There was a violent anti-gay law that led to 4 waves of persecutions in the 1700s. It's a little unclear, but it seems like there were 600 men arrested, or mostly men arrested under that law. The 19th century had, at first, just a repressive social culture, and then they also had a law. And so that's what that was born into. And the interesting thing about doing queer history here is you can see the people, because it's a small enough place, you can see the people who like pushed things forward. Like, I was just rereading Susan Stryker's book on trans history, and it's really striking. I don't know. It stands out that there's no cohesive narrative because the US is so big. There were things happening in New York on the East Coast, there were things happening in San Francisco, and there was some communication, but functionally, these are separate cultures, whereas the Netherlands and Amsterdam in specific are small enough that individual people stand out. Yeah, they functioned in the US as well. We just don't know their names because there were so many of them. And what Beck did that was important at first was starting the first modern gay bar. So like there were always queer spaces, but like now you can go to a pub to hang out with people like you. And she had to be incredibly protective to do it. So of course she turned the pub into a way station for the resistance. So Jewish people would hide there on the way out of the city, and guns going to the resistance would be hidden there. And I think the story you want me to tell is one night, and again, like this sounds like a movie. I always have to have the disclaimer. This sounds like a movie. Multiple historians have verified it. But she saw a Nazi coming. She threw the light and the lock at the same time. So when the Nazi came, she was like, saying, "Oh, sorry, we're having problems." And as she was doing it, she was stamping on the floor to let the Jewish people hiding in the basement to know that they had to sneak out the cellar window. When she thought they'd had enough time, she lets in the officer. The officer kind of looks around and he says, "Okay, I have to check the rest of the building." And she lived above the bar. And then in the attic were guns for the resistance. So when they go into the staircase up to her apartment, she tells him that she's on his side. And, she just happens to have some booze in her apartment if he wants a drink before he continues searching. And because at this point she's been staying up 25 years drinking with her customers, she drinks him under the table, pours him out in the street, and no one finds the guns, and Mancha doesn't get checked again for the rest of the war. Which we've got a lot of really cool queer heroes like that. People in the resistance, people who were, brave or quick thinking. But I think the community aspect is what's really powerful. And you're asking about your guests. I think we now have the ability to create community at a distance. It's harder. There's a lot of, social media makes you feel like you're in community, but can often just be, people yelling at each other.
And more advertisements replacing all of the friends.
I have some business Instagram accounts, so I'm not sure I get to join this conversation. So much time spending on Reels.
Oh yeah.
But I think what's powerful with a lot of the people who move the needle forward, like Jerry Afria, who I mentioned earlier with Nederland Fort Beter, there is a racist Christmas cartoon that was developed around the time that slavery was ending and very much came out of anxiety about slavery ending. And it was still in use. And Jerry is one of a group of people, not just him, like this wonderful man named Paris Youngloy who's passed away. All these people working together, they've really moved the needle. So now at least the urban part of the country doesn't really use that caricature anymore. And yet,
Eat at Christmas that you're talking about. Yeah, I noticed in 20 years it had gone away. Most
Yeah.
of the year it's gone
I
away.
mean, if you go to the southern part of the country, if you go to the more rural parts of the country, you'll still see it.
Well, but I think there's the consciousness that like this is a racist thing and like maybe don't do it.
I don't know. Some people will still defend it. I can guarantee.
They will.
Yep.
They will.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
as you guys know, like the Netherlands is incredibly innovative when they're solving new problems, and tradition has the power of God here. Like I always say that, like, my building was built in 1980 and I have a steep staircase and a pole with a pulley that I'm going to have to use when I move because this is how we do things. So it's one of the contrasts of the country. I think it's something you run into. And so I just try and counter it, because I do, not often, but I do sometimes get people like that on my tours because businesses, set up tours, and then the Dutch people who are on this tour don't know what they've signed up for. Or, we do events free to
They don't know history probably either.
No, they don't. That is something I get a lot, where Dutch people at the beginning of the tour say, don't worry if you don't tell me anything new. And at the end of the tour, with the women's tour, they'll be like, don't worry if you don't tell me anything new. And at the end, they'll be like, I had heard of Wilhelmina, right? Heard of Wilhelmina and Walena, and that's it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is true in the US, right? Like there were so many feminists. I know Susan B. Anthony. I know Elizabeth Cady Stanton because in theory I was named after her. And Jane Addams. Those might be the only 19th century feminists I know in the US. So it's not
How little we know about feminists in history, but also African American heroes. Like we just don't know any of that.
Yep.
Well, or we know their names and that's about all we know about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Actually, in that vein, I'm going to skip around a little bit. Can you talk about one of the things that I love about your tours is that you talk about your research process a little bit, and you talk about like I found this, I'm sharing this story with you, like I want like I'm so glad that I get to share this with you and that you can maybe pass it on. But can you talk a little bit about, for people who do want to learn more of these sort of undiscovered or underrated stories, like how can they go about, can you talk about your research project and how other folks might be able to find stories like this as well?
Well, it's much better now in that auto translate tools are really helpful. There's a magazine called Ons Amsterdam, Our Amsterdam, and it's basically written by historians. Like it's for the general public. It's a good
That's cool.
example of public history, which is the discipline of sharing history, sharing academic work with the general public. So there's things like that. I have to say, it's just a lot of accumulation. Like I started with Russell Shorto, who's an American. He wrote a book on Amsterdam, which is very American and very positive. There was a kind of like the OG of Amsterdam history, this guy, Geert Maak. He's kind of old-fashioned Dutch. He's very dour. I mean, more so like after you read Russell Shorter, it was like, woof, that is a much more negative view of the city. So putting like, that's what I always start with my guides, recommending like read these two books side by side. It'll give you a good general lay of the land. In terms of the stories, it's a lot of research. Like most of what I do is secondary sources. So I do read some primary sources. Like, for example, we talk about Yo Bomer, who was the woman who made Vincent van Gogh famous. She was his brother Teo's widow. Like, I've read her diary. We talk about the persecutions in the 1700s. I've read the bailiff's records for the first Amsterdam trial. You know, a bunch of stuff. We talk about Benno Premsela. I've seen his documentary. We talk about Frida Bell'Infanta. I've seen the interview she did for the Holocaust Museum. So there is some primary sources, but the vast majority are secondary sources. So someone else writing about them. And I think that can be a bit of a challenge because honestly, a lot of these stories I've picked up as, you know, a chapter in someone else's book or a paragraph in another book. And then I have to go kind of hunt down what this means. So it's, it's kind of why we exist. It's some of the information is there and I hope people will look it up. But a lot of this is information that I've accumulated over 9 years of lots of reading, lots of going to museums, lots of lectures, and specifically seeking out like Black historians, feminist historians, queer historians. The queer tour was researched because we have a queer archive in the Netherlands. We have an archive that's dedicated just to queer history. And I went there and one of the lovely archivists just set me up with a bunch of material. I spent the summer reading there. And one of my favorite stories is McKeel. And McKeel was, I don't know, maybe a chapter, maybe less than that, in a book about women dressing as men. So it's, I want to encourage people to read. And also, there's a reason we have to do what we do because unfortunately there's not a lot outside of academia, and even within academia there's not enough, but especially outside of academia, I have a Trello with 10,000 cards. I have a Google map with, I can't even guess how many pins are in that Google map. So it's, I'm sorry to give an unsatisfying answer.
So that was an amazing conversation, and they're being told to cut it short by Bane, who has to edit all of this.
Sorry, guys.
But the amazing conversation. I love all conversations with Elyzabeth Gorman. Her company, Badass Tours, is great. You can book walking tours of Amsterdam. You can book special LGBTQ tours, special resistance tours. But any tour that you book with them, you're going to learn a lot. And highly recommend it. You want to give us your URL, Elyzabeth?
Yeah, badasstours.nl.
Perfect.
It's
excellent.
We're on socials at Badass Tours, and in addition to queer history and women's history, we cover Black and Asian history and Caribbean history, and we're one of the only ones that talk about Jewish history before the Holocaust, unfortunately. A lot of the Jewish history information is just the Holocaust. So we do the full
Jewish tour, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which again, we started because we saw a gap. We saw both locals, just like with them not knowing about any of these women, locals and tourists alike were only learning about the Holocaust. So we wanted to share the full history.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's nice to meet you, Bane.
At GTFO Tours, we help Americans get out of the U.S. through relocation tours and coaching. We help folks through your whole journey. We can help you figure out which countries you can or would want to move to. We coach you through the process, and we have a global network of experts who can help you with the nitty-gritty details of a given country. In the Netherlands, we are those experts, so we can answer all of your questions about life here. walk you through the bureaucracy, connect you to experts as needed. We also do relocation tours, taking you to cities where you might want to live, teaching you things about visas and taxes and all of that other bureaucracy, and also introducing you to other DAFters and the GTFO communities. You can book a consult with us at gtfotours.com. Here's Bane with the news.
All right. Some good news on housing prices for Americans moving to the Netherlands. The Dutch statistic agency, called CBS, showed that prices of homes in 6 Dutch cities fell in the second quarter of 2026. This could be welcomed relief for Americans looking for affordable housing in the Netherlands. Prompted by a large increase of former rented houses onto the market following changes to rental law last year, homebuyers in some areas of Zeeland, Ouder Amsterdam, Hillegom, Valkenswaard, Windhoven, and
How's your Dutch pronunciation, Bane?
how the do you say that? It's still
Eiselstein.
all right. And Eiselstein fell as much as 5% from a year ago. Not all house prices are going down though. House prices in the Netherlands overall were up 4.2% from a year ago. Prices in Amsterdam rose just 0.1%. Americans moving to the Netherlands usually rent for a year, but with stiff competition for rental units, rental prices have been rising steadily each quarter. All right, what do y'all think about it?
I mean, this is a question that we get a lot, should I rent or should I buy? And I would say normally 95% of the time, my advice would always be rent before you buy. That it's better to get to know a place a little bit. And generally speaking, it takes a while before you can get any kind of a return on your investment. If you sell, selling can take a while. The Netherlands is in a weird place. Like you said, they've changed this rental law. So there's a glut of homes for sale that used to be rentals. It's actually almost a better time to buy because I think that because there's a surplus on the market right now. In a year from now, which is the soonest you would be able to get out of a rental anyway, you probably would be able to turn it around for a profit. And again, because of the situation in the rental market where you're having to put basically spend 15 months to put it down to get a place, you're also having to put a big, that's a big chunk of change too, right? And
Yeah.
relative to when you buy a house here, it's not the same way that it is in the US, where you would typically pay 20% plus closing costs. Here they have a transfer cost, but it's a lot less that you actually end up paying for a purchase. So
I would say people with a lot of pets or weird pets, unusual pets, I should say, not weird, may not, they may really struggle to find housing to rent. And if they happen to have enough cash to buy, or they have a labor contract that could get them a mortgage, then buying is possibly a good idea. But I had somebody who I spoke to recently who had never been to the Netherlands and was planning to move here sight unseen. And they had a very low budget, but they had cash. And I was like, I still think you should rent if you haven't been here. Like, I think buying is a very serious obligation, right? And the timing can be tricky if you're just moving here as well. But it's always a good idea to buy in the Netherlands, I think.
curious about what it's like to live abroad? Join our relocation tour. You'll tour cities you might want to live in, learn about the nitty-gritty details of moving abroad, and most importantly, make friends and find community with others who are considering the move and who have already made the leap. Our tour is coming up fast, so sign up today.
Bane, do we have a listener question for?
You know we do. This one from Susie from Boston. I want to leave the U.S. and I'm not sure where I want to go. Are there places I can live without a visa for a year?
Yes, there are. So there are quite a few places around the world where you can go for 6 months or 9 months, and but there are 2 places in Europe where you can go for a year without a visa. The 2 places in Europe are Georgia which is former Soviet Union, and Albania. Albania is very popular these days. A lot of people are going to Albania, low cost of living. So if you're a digital nomad or you have passive income, it's a great option. You can go for a year. Then you have to leave. You have to leave for, I believe it's 90 days. You've got to be gone for 90 days. You can come back for a year. Or you can apply for your visa before your 1 year is up if you decide you like it. A lot of people use that. They stay there for a year and then they travel around and they look for other places because there are a lot of places near Albania that are EU. And generally, which actually brings me to the Schengen Shuffle, which is what a lot of people do, is you, as an American, you can do 90 days in the Schengen zone, which is most of Western Europe, pretty much, not all, but most of Western Europe. Then you have to leave the Schengen zone for 90 days. No, sorry, yes, 90 days. You have to
Yep,
leave
you can
it
be in for
for
90 out of 180 days.
Yeah, 90 out of 180 days. So you can stay 90 days in a Schengen zone country, then you leave for 90 days. So you could go to some place like the UK for 90 days, and then France for 90 days, then back to, I believe Ireland is not in the Schengen
Ireland
zone.
is not.
So
Yeah.
Ireland, you could go to Albania, and then you can sort of switch back and forth. A lot of people do that, but you've got to be very careful about the number of days and make sure that you don't overstay your Schengen visa, because now it's all fancy now. They have all kinds of a new system that's very technologically advanced, and they know if you're here like a minute too long, and then you'll be banned. So you really have to manage your travel very well if you're doing that, and go between Schengen and non-Schengen countries. But if you want to put down some roots for a year, then I think Albania in particular, but also Georgia, low cost of living, lots of American expats and internationals.
And I think it's beautiful, right? Albania is right next to
Beautiful.
Greece. Yeah.
Very
Nice
good.
beaches.
I've heard.
Yeah,
Yeah. You can
very,
get an
very
apartment
nice.
there for
I
like
love it.
500, 600 a month,
Yeah,
right?
for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. Nice apartments. Like,
Yeah.
it's modern European, basically. Well, it's almost. It's kind of like somewhere between developing and Western Europe, something like that.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
Prices
Yeah.
of the developing world and some of the
Yeah,
amenities
kind
of
of.
Western
Yeah,
Europe.
basically.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's just no work. So you've got to be either a digital nomad or a passive income visa. There is some work, but like it's not enough to live on, and you're not going to find it most likely because you don't, unless you happen to speak the language, which I can't remember the name of.
Albanian.
Is
It
it
is
called
Albanian.
Yeah.
It's called
Okay.
Albanian. Yeah.
It's called
I
Albanian.
lived with I had a roommate named Albie the Albanian. So his name wasn't the Albanian. That was not his last
What
name,
you
but his
call
name
it.
was Albie and he was Albanian. So
Albania.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I would look at Albania and Georgia as the two best options.
You have been posting consistently for months and still have no idea if any of it is actually bringing in customers. You are not doing it wrong. You are doing it without a strategy. Most small business owners are spending real time and real money on social media that is not converting. The content looks fine, the effort is there, the system underneath it is not. This is what we fix at Bangkok Media. We offer conversion-focused social media management and social media strategies, a 30-plus page data-backed document built specifically for small business owners. And it's jam-packed with research, suggestions, and best practices relevant to your market. It will have everything you need to run your social media the right way and actually see results. Link in the description.
So thank you all for joining this edition of Let's GTFO with Bethany and Jana. It's been a pleasure spending this hour with you. And would you please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button? Also, maybe share it, like it, help us out there. Thank you.
Oh, it's time to get the fuck out. Yeah, it's time to peace out.